we also have now a foreign affairs expert, Pathikrit Payne, joining us this morning. Mr. Payne, thank you so much for being here with us. A historic visit, so to speak, of US Vice President J.D. Vance, now receiving the Guard of Honor, being accorded by the Indian Armed Forces contingent to him at the Palam airport.
Well, definitely, it's basically a semi-official visit. He's coming for some personal family, some kind of a get-together for an occasion. And at the same time, it's been converted as a visit where some very crucial things will be definitely discussed. Remember, he is probably the second most powerful person in the United States right now. And so invariably when he has come, even if it's for a semi-official visit, he definitely is carrying some, messages and instructions and something from the Trump administration, especially in the realm of 2-3 major areas where collaborations and movement in the forward direction are expected. First, invariably, is the trade deal, the 19th chapter trade deal that is being intensely negotiated by India and United States. The second is the prospect in the realm of nuclear power development in India, where India has, pledged that it would support, manufacturing of small modular reactors, around 50 to the least. And so many companies of the United States like Holtec are very interested to set up a joint venture with Indian companies like L&T. That's one part. The third, invariably, is there would be a certain amount of push for defense deals from the American side. Though India has a Atmanirbhar Bharat policy and India will never get into that mode that we are going to take anything just because somebody is pushing for it. But yes, there are areas of collaboration. For example, what was termed as Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technology, that has a new name called Trust now. And so there are major areas of collaboration expected in the realm of quantum computing, AI, or biotechnology, and in fact also in defense manufacturing in India. So while India is very keen to deepen its defense cooperation with the United States, but India would prefer manufacturing of those to be happening in India. So I think there are major areas of collaboration, convergence, which will be discussed. But yes, there are certain areas of divergence and status quo also. India has a very independent foreign policy, so its own relation with countries like Russia and China are also critical in a certain way, primarily because of the BRICS formation. So it's a very positive, step in the right direction. I'm sure this visit will have very fruitful outcomes. Back to you.
Fruitful outcomes is what is expected, and there we have an Indian Navy officer marching towards J.D. Vance as he is inspecting the Guard of Honor. J.D. Vance now, after inspecting, now receiving the Guard of Honor by the Indian Armed Forces. Remember, the Guard of Honor is accorded to all visiting heads of state as well as VIPs on official visits to India. J.D. Vance now walking on that red carpet, inspecting the Guard of Honor before he proceeds with his agenda for the day. Of course, we heard Mr. Payne saying that bilateral trade is on agenda today. Well, of course, bilateral trade continues to be on agenda for India and the US. And that is something that all eyes and ears are waiting to get more details of after that meeting between US Vice President J.D. Vance and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi takes place starting 6 p.m. today. Well, on your screens, J.D. Vance being accompanied by an Indian naval officer slow marching as the live band plays a hymn as J.D. Vance inspects the Guard of Honor being accorded to him by the Indian Armed Forces. Well, Mr. Payne, if you're still with us, we do remember that the last family visit, perhaps talked about family visit, that Usha Vance and J.D. Vance had embarked upon was to Greenland. And of course, he received a fairly frosty reception there. This one seems to be fairly different from the trip to Greenland, doesn't it? All right. Well, so there you have it. The inspection of the Guard of Honor done. J.D. Vance now walking towards his US-built car. I'm sure Mr. Donald Trump would be happy with that. And J.D. Vance is now in India. J.D. Vance has received the Guard of Honor and will now walk towards his vehicle and depart for his agenda for the rest of the day. And that, of course, includes, among other things, a meeting with Prime Minister Modi at 6 p.m. today, followed by a dinner which is being hosted by Prime Minister Modi in reception of JD Vance. That's the only official visit which would take place today. The official talks would take place this evening before JD Vance, his wife Usha Vance, and the children proceed to Jaipur tomorrow. Remember, this is a 4-day visit. Official talks, bilateral trade, tariff-related talks expected to be held just today. And then tomorrow is when JD Vance departs for Jaipur, followed by just a midday session in Agra on April 23rd before returning to Jaipur and finally flying out on the 24th back to the US. Remember, JD Vance has visited India from Italy. He hasn't flown in from the United States. He is visiting India from Italy. And there you have it, his children now coming off the aircraft dressed in Indian attire. The India roots seem fairly well donned by the little children, 3 of them all dressed in Indian attire. You have a little girl now being carried by JD Vance himself, dressed in an Indian lehenga. And you have the little boys wearing a saffron colored kurta and another white colored kurta, well dressed for occasion, as they call it. There you have it, JD Vance's son in a orange kurta, the older child wearing a white kurta, and the daughter dressed in a lehenga. Fairly well suited for the occasion if tourism and reconnecting with family ties and family roots is what the second most powerful family in the US is here in India for. All right, and hand it over now to my colleague Neha Bhan, who is joining me in the studio. Neha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Karthik. Well, there you have it. United States Vice President JD Vance and his Indian origin American wife Usha arriving in India. They're on a 4-day visit to India starting today. Accompanied by their children, very beautifully, they're explained by my colleague Karthik Malhotra. Visuals there right on your screens. Vance is accompanied by at least 5 senior US officials, including representatives from the Pentagon and the State Department. Let me quickly, in fact, introduce to my panel of guests here. I'm joined by Ambassador Suresh K. Goyal. He's a former Indian diplomat. I'm also joined by Pramit Pal Chaudhary, who's a foreign affairs analyst. Well, let me quickly go across to Ambassador Goyal. First of all, a very warm welcome to you, Ambassador Goyal. JD Vance's visit, comes at a time when US-India ties are facing pressure over tariffs and trade. How do you interpret the optics of this visit? Let me start off by asking you this.
Great optics, Neha, as we can see now right from the screen, the dance, the great welcome extended to the family. As far as I can see, really, Neha, this visit is primarily to familiarize the family with the roots, Indian roots of the mother Usha Vance, and there will be a huge focus on basically going to the spots like going to the Janpad, going the Emporium, going to Akshardham, etc., etc. But amongst all those things, I think the one meeting that Vice President Vance is going to have in the evening today with Prime Minister Modi is an important one, because I think that is when they would be focusing on the substance of the India-US relationship in terms of trade, tariff, and the trade agreement that we are looking at. Neha.
Right, and also, Ambassador, you're talking about the trade here. Of course, that is the top of the agenda. But then there are reports that India is also looking to overhaul its nuclear liability law. Do you think that could also come up for discussion during this visit?
I'm quite certain that there will be interactions, there will be some exchange of views on those things. But the nuclear liability law is not really just one-off change. It is going to take some time, because that law really has been mentioned time and again in terms of the American transfer of nuclear technology, the civil reactors to the modular reactors. Therefore, there would be discussions between, I think, experts before anything can be said. Otherwise, there could be an exchange of views, but I don't think it will take too much of time, really, so to say.
Right, Ambassador, and also, you were talking about his, his Akshardham visit, and the cultural
Yes.
diplomacy here seems to be the part of the itinerary as well. Temples, heritage walks, and family involvement. Now, the question here is, how effective is this kind of soft power in terms of, in creating long-term diplomatic goodwill?
Uh, Neha, I have been Director General of ICCR for more than 3 years, and I've always maintained one thing, that the cultural diplomacy is important because it lubricates communications, it promotes communications between the two countries, between two people, it promotes understanding, etc., etc. And therefore, it's very, very important. It builds up on the relationship. But uh, the substance of the relationship, which will involve bilateral trade, which will involve bilateral strategic component, common concerns, those are very, very important. And unless the two countries together work on those common interests, the cultural diplomacy role will be limited, really, in that sense, to effect good communication, but it can't go beyond that. But here, I would say that Usha Vance, we always look at as Indian national. Usha Wong, Usha Vance is an American citizen. She's the wife of the vice president of the USA. And for her, I think eventually what will matter is what the USA interests are. Yes, cultural background, civilizational background will make a difference. But I don't think we should really expect too much on that account, really, uh, beyond just having an understanding of each other.
Right. Continue to stay with
Yeah.
us, Ambassador. In fact, I'm also joined by my colleague Aditya Rajkol with more details on the same. Aditya, a very good morning to you. Do go on and tell us, how does JD Vance's visit really change the conversations around frosty relationships in view of tariffs?
Well, already, JD Vance has landed in India. Those visuals coming on the screen of the head of the protocol of the Ministry of External Affairs, Anshuman Gaur, welcoming JD Vance and, of course, his entire family from Rome, where they had, of course, met Pope. And, of course, this is a very significant visit coming just, in less than 4 months of President Trump actually taking over as the US president for the second time. I think this will build the conversation forward. That is the big diplomatic message from this particular visit. Of course, a lot would be discussed, be it on tariffs, on the current trade negotiations that are underway between New Delhi and Washington D.C. That would be taken forward significantly. Of course, the United States would want better trade, better, particularly defense ties with India, and also to counterbalance, China in the Indo-Pacific, to check China's rise and hegemony in the region as well. And for that, of course, the Quad Summit is significant, which will be held later this year, and New Delhi will be hosting the Quad Summit this year. So the finer points, the blueprint.
All right, there seems to be a network issue. We'll try to get back to my colleague Aditya Rajkol. Meanwhile, for those who have just joined us, let me quickly tell you what's really happening. United States President, Vice President JD Vance and his Indian origin American wife Usha have landed in India. They're on a 4-day visit beginning today. Vance, they're accompanied by at least 5 senior US officials, including representatives from the Pentagon and the State Department. Vance is all set to hold talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi this evening in New Delhi. The meeting will likely focus on early finalization of the proposed bilateral trade pact and ways to bolster India-US ties. The two sides there will also exchange views on regional and global developments of mutual interest. Vance is traveling to India against the backdrop of Trump's policy on tariffs that triggered massive trade disruptions and fears of a global economic recession. Here is what his itinerary really looks like. Soon after his arrival there, the Vance family now will visit the Swami Narayan Akshardham temple and also the Red Fort. And in the afternoon, J.D. Vance will meet National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and BJP President J.P. Nadda. Prime Minister Modi will interact with Vance and his family and will host them for a formal dinner in the evening at his official residence at 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. Vance there will travel to Jaipur on the 22nd of April and will visit key tourist sites and have some engagements. The US Vice President and his family will travel to Agra the next day to visit the Taj Mahal and Shilpgram. After concluding their trip to Agra, the Vances will return to Jaipur in the second half of the 23rd of April. In fact, in Jaipur, the Vances are set to stay at the elegant Rambagh Palace. Vance and his family will depart for the US from Jaipur on the 24th of April. Foreign Affairs analyst Pramit Pal Chaudhary also joins me with more details on the same. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Chaudhary. You know, India has consistently pushed back against protectionist policies, Mr. Chaudhary. With Vance having supported tariffs, do you see any real room for negotiation here?
Yes, I think we're already very well advanced on the tariff side. The negotiations there are, I gather, quite advanced. Only the agricultural segment is still waiting for some sort of agreement. It's the digital side that there's going to be a little bit more difficulty. For example, on issues like cloud standards and so on and so forth. But remember, the compact that Modi and Trump put together at their summit in February had three elements: trade, security, and technology. Trade is the only point where Trump said we need to negotiate. On the security side and on the technology side, there is very little difference between the two sides.
United States Vice President J.D. Vance and his Indian origin American wife Usha arrived on a 4-day visit to India beginning today. Ashwini Vaishnav received Vance at the Delhi airport where he was given Guard of Honor. Vance is accompanied by at least 5 senior US officials, including representatives from the Pentagon and the State Department. He will be holding talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi this evening in New Delhi. The meeting there will likely focus on early finalization of the proposed bilateral trade pact and ways to bolster India-US ties. The two sides will also exchange views on regional and global developments of mutual interest. Vance is traveling to India against the backdrop of Trump's policy on tariffs that triggered massive trade disruptions and fears of global economic recession. Let me quickly go across to my guests, Ambassador Suresh K. Goyal, former Indian diplomat, and my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul. They continue to stay with us. Ambassador Goyal, Vice President Vance's visit is being called personal, yet it's packed with high-level meetings. How much weight really, should we assign to this kind of engagement when it comes to, so early into the Trump's administration's second term?
Very, very high weightage we must accord to this visit, really. But incidentally, just as a kind of an aside, I'm watching the visuals and the 3 children accompanying Vice President Vance and the mother, Usha Vance, and the way the children actually are clinging to the parents. I'm mentioning it in a light-hearted manner. It looks like a family outing rather than an official visit, which is very heartwarming, I would say. Anyway, having said that, it is primarily a personal visit, really speaking, because both the mother and the father, they do want to acquaint the children with the roots, where the mother comes from. So there'll be a lot of those things on the agenda. You already mentioned Jaipur, Agra, Janpat, etc., and everything. But 1 or 2 meetings, or 2 or 3 meetings that he's going to have as a vice president in Delhi, they are going to be very important because they will actually be giving an indication into what path we are going to take, what trajectory are we going to take in future discussions For example, the meeting with the Prime Minister I'm quite sure, will be mainly on trade and tariff, what the President Trump's whole thinking is about. It is not going to be a detailed meeting, but generally a kind of a policy level meeting, where I'm sure Vice President Vance will be acquainting Prime Minister Modi of the current US thinking and what we can expect in the discussions further when on the trade agreement. Similarly, on security, technology, etc., the other things, there is very little difference really between the two, except in the case of technology, where it is mostly done by the private corporate sector. And the issues are really so many in terms of liabilities, if it's nuclear technology, if it is civil aviation technology, then the question of how those things are going to be absorbed in the current manufacturing process in India. So there are many issues, but those are matters of details and they will be sorted out as the time goes by. But the elephant in the room really is current tariff, which will be the meeting with the Prime Minister Modi.
Right, right. Ambassador Goel, continue to stay with us. Let me quickly go across to Preetam Pal Chaudhary. Mr. Chaudhary, the question also is, how should India really recalibrate its posture now that it's dealing with a very different White House from Biden's, especially, you know, when we're talking on issues like tech, transfer, defense, and of course, tariffs?
Well, actually, the Trump administration on tech transfer seems to be even more generous than previous governments. When Modi and Trump met in February, it was to the Indian government's surprise that Trump said, "Why don't you consider buying the F-35?" Because the F-35 is a fifth-generation technology fighter, which is something that legally India, because we are not a treaty ally of the United States, is not eligible for. And you can see in the joint statement that the officials were not, the US officials actually downplayed it. They just said, we will review the technology agreements that restrictions that India faces. But what is very clear was that the President Trump said, I don't see why India should not get the same level of technology that, let's say, Israel or a NATO ally of the United States does. So Trump, who in many ways is a bit of a rule breaker and a maverick, looked at all of this and he said, I don't see why India shouldn't get the same technology that American allies do, even though it's not officially an ally. So I think on that front, I think we'll actually see a fair degree of change, a willingness on the American side to change their rules in favor of India. And we saw that besides the supply chain integration agreements, and Biden had agreed with India on semiconductors, on working together on semiconductors, working together on pharmaceuticals, advanced materials, Trump added drones, autonomous systems, in other words, and he says, I want an industrial alliance between India and the United States companies on drone technology. And immediately after that, you saw Anduril, one of the biggest American drone manufacturers, sign an alliance agreement with the Mahindras. Other such agreements are now taking place. So on the security, the Trump administration, I would argue, is actually quite willing to share with us on technology. But the trade surplus, the trade deficit America runs with us is definitely a bugbear with him. The Americans are not happy that over the past 10 years, India has actually doubled its tariffs against American products very quietly, but it's very clear to the Americans what we have done. And that comes to sort of a larger policy, industrial policy that India has. So aligning with them on that is going to be, I think, the bigger issue. Vance, besides meeting Trump, Modi, and members of the cabinet tonight, we'll also probably, we've seen the reports already in the media, be giving a major policy speech tomorrow in Jaipur on the bilateral relationship. That speech will not be his personal, that will be one drafted by the government on an official basis. And I expect that will outline to a large extent where the US government sees the relationship going post the February summit.